question has to do with kind of gesture and foreshortening. So I think this is a really nice, successful study of the two male fighters. The foreshortening of the figure and the mannequin as we see it here, it's pretty good. Like I could see that mostly kind of the overlaps in certain areas. But I think some other areas might get a little stiff, and that might be a result of too much kind of working from the outside. And I know that the gesture approach that we cover isn't the easiest to figure out how to foreshorten with, and then the construction on top of that can complicate that. So, I really have no problem with the way that this is drawn, but I did want to take the opportunity with this. It's a consistently difficult thing for people to kind of think about how we could do the same image with the kind of the approach that's covered in the intro to figure course. So here's my gesture for this guy, working down into my pelvis, kind of distorting some of those lines based on how I would normally draw them to get that compression or contraction in of the rib cage against the pelvis. I think what might happen here that I see quite a bit and I struggle with myself is that sometimes with, poses that are really kind of folded in on the figure, we have a tendency to kind of put forms or shapes next to each other instead of in front or behind each other. So like one example might be thinking about the gesture of this leg. Like it looks kind of more like you've kind of nicely put it next to the body instead of, siding it to maybe here, right? And it could be just an issue also of story. You might prefer that for the, the negative shape or really whatever reason is fine to do that. But the kind of the issue I'm addressing more is that when we do have this difficult challenge of foreshortening, that does seem to be an automatic kind of default thing that we all do, is kind of put things next to one another. Or I see that people will make parts longer as opposed to making them shorter, and that's also kind of a consequence of putting things next to each other. So that would be where I'm seeing that, kind of getting ready for that, what looks like a stomp of some kind. And then on this one, the leg, like this one still comes forward. And I think your wrapping lines there are nice. And then this comes down, and then even this arm looks like it might come out at us more. So this I would probably foreshorten a bit. Same thing with this. And I think in some areas it's clear that you're just kind of pushing dynamic qualities, which is also a great way to kind of solve for these types of poses. So let's say that's my gesture. So just soften it a little bit or just erase it back. And then let's focus on what maybe the connected forms are doing. So next, kind of hidden in here because the raise of the shoulders. Cage would be here. Let's draw through that leg. You could do it lightly, but I do like in these especially, it helps me to see all the way through. It does get a little bit messy, in terms of like the density of line and its buildup. But this is mostly a study for me to see how to deal with a pose like this, not to create at this point a rendering, although there's nothing wrong with that either.
Hey guys, this critique was taken from a course I just put out on Proco.com on the fundamentals of figure construction. In it, I go through the basics of drawing lines, drawing primitive shapes, and then using those shapes to create more complex parts of the body. There's over 5 hours of lectures, demonstrations, and student critique videos. If you're interested, check out the link in the description. Thanks, and back to the video.
Clavicle are really high, and that's kind of gives us this big raise or this big kind of shape around the shoulders. Here's that coastal plane, and then what's that shape of the pelvis doing? Well, it looks like it's kind of tilted up and then turned up. Have that as is line up here. Here's that pelvic box. Here's my landmarks for this one. And so then we get this pinch across the middle. So these would be, instead of that side to side C curve, it'd be focused on trying to show that compression across the front. This side still is pretty stretched. And then in terms of the perspectives, this is where I think I see that front plane of the knee. And then I want to bring that back. I'm going to box this or use a box for this because I could see that kind of that nice light and shadow of the box, or the core shadow across that leg. So I'm using that as a reference point to think about this, kind of pushing it in front of the pelvis just for the effect of foreshortening. And then I'll hatch this in just to give it some separation from all that buildup. And then a lot of times what I'll do is when I have that front plane of the knee like that, I'll just take it and slide it down. Take the first that plane and just build that rhythm down. If you ever end up feeling like you're kind of of stuck on how to relate that front part of the shin to the leg. And then I could just go back and add a little depth, but this is, pretty foreshortened. Down, here's the bottom of the foot. And then let's just set up this foot here as a plane. Trying to get a little bit of that side bottom. And then arm goes this way a little bit more. I'm gonna do this as a box too. There's actually parts, to your drawing that I like more in terms of like the turning of the head or the bigger expanse. It does, maybe has like a different feeling, a more like aggressive stomp in yours. So that's like definitely a cooler gesture in a sense. So my study in this is really just to help with what I think is a kind of common question, just the foreshortening of these forms, whether in a gesture or in the perspective buildup. Let's say that's forearm hand, and then here let's put on another box. Normally my start for the leg would go at the bottom third. That's a more comfortable place to start it for me, but when we do have a movement like this, we have to, let's get rid of that, kind of in front, then I just need to be more focused on the overlap, which would, here I'm really trying to be careful with my T's. What's in front, what's behind, here rib cage behind, head behind, neck behind, femur. And then same thing, if you can identify the front plane of that knee, kind of take those corner points and see if you could find a gesture down. Here this arm comes out, maybe about this angle, and then perspective of this. The other thing that's kind of fun to think about in these poses, even though we didn't talk too much about two figures, is integrating a gesture. So like this leg now becomes a nice opportunity to think about how to lead the eye into that figure. I already have the implied line, right? The implied line being sometimes it's called a psychological line, like the action of one area is kind of bringing the eye to the next. So that looks like it's going to get stomped down here. So we could just kind of put a head, and let's start our next gesture here. But thinking about ways that I could unify the two, that always is a hard thing. Getting two figures to feel like they're in the same space together. Perspective is one way to do that. Gesture is another. So maybe this one, I don't start as much with gesture because there's not much of a body to gesture. So this one, my foreshortening, would be more reliant on kind of what we talk about in the lesson or the class where we stack shapes. The figure becomes more abstract and we just have to stack shapes. And then I could, come back into each shape and think about a corner, like maybe this is the top of the shoulder versus the bottom or the back of the rib cage. Again, hatching for that same reason. We could bring his head up and where's the base of the skull? We give him a little bit more neck. So that'd be the spine. And then pelvis, I'm seeing pelvis like right here. So it's really another really slight shape there, and then a little bit more here. So, how would you build or like even begin to gesture that? This is my gesture, right? It's just that organization of shape. And then, one part that's cool is like, right, I kind of like the way his leg as it comes up echoes the other fighter's leg coming down. So let's draw that leg. His knee is still pretty low. We'd have that foreshortened knee there. And then the lower leg kind of looks like it's more extended, like it's aiming like for his stomach. So this is kind of my knee, gesture up, and then foot 3/4. So again, sorry, just for clarity, let's just get this up. And then I'm gonna try to give this ramp just so we have that clear front side or progression of perspective up with the kick. I probably need to relate their knees a little bit better, or the position of one leg to the next, but I'm just going to go with it for the moment. The other leg would be out here. And what I like about this is like the other leg kind of echoes that leg. So what I like that it does is if you follow down with this kick, I guess he's kind of jumping. That just cleared to me more. I couldn't tell at first if this leg was weighted, but he's jumping. And then, so there's kind of like a big curve that takes you down and then back up again. So anytime there's two figures and some kind of relational gesture, I always try to see if I can create that compositional, some compositional quality between them. So that goes up and this foot's here. And so on mine, I kind of raised it and brought it closer to the hand. That way I could make that compositional path. Maybe that putting the toe here brings you up to the hand, and then that gives that composition and that movement back up into the arm, and then we go back and we do the whole experience of their combat together again. And then let's get his arms. So you see this one, the difference is I didn't do much of a gesture on this one. On this one, I just kind of slowly built my forms because of the degree to which they're all very much overlapped and foreshortened. So every gesture can be different. A gesture for the heavily foreshortened figure on the bottom could be stacking forms. The gesture for the somewhat figure or foreshortened figure on the top, you could still use your basic lay-in rhythmic method that we played with in class. Here's this arm, so thinking of ways that I could also kind of make these compositionally integrated. I like that this one comes across, but then also comes back out a little bit. So let's move that up. And we brought this space a little bit closer together. I think it just feels a little bit more dramatic, but again, it doesn't have to be. And then the shape of the hand will kind of be here. And then this arm, knock some of this back, very close to the head. It's like it's, I don't know, my best guess here is that it's going somewhat forward and then heavily foreshortened. So I kind of like the limbs covering the, they look like they're in that very protective or defensive stance or position out in front of his face, and then hand goes across. So kind of thinking about that whole shape. And I kind of like how the gesture of the hands for the body on the figure on the bottom reflects that big gesture that we made for the figure's relationships or relationship. So again, nothing at all wrong with what you did. These are just, or this is a way I might approach kind of using the tools from class, so you could see how some of those, more those confusing steps that maybe not seem to apply to foreshortening, how they might in this case. And then how I've also made some changes, like you, to build up tension between the figures and their interaction. And then how my compositional mind or thought process plays out when there's more than one figure here. And then one more, let's try this one. I think this is fundamentally the same issue where we're having, it's almost like the figure above, except the crouch isn't as dramatic. So we could do head. You could try, if the gesture is the part that throws anybody for the foreshortening, just stack forms. Go through the same things that we set up. You're almost kind of just skipping step one at that stage and starting at shape, connections, landmarks, right? That kind of thing. And I think the issue here might be that the approach that's taken now, which somewhat outline or kind of more focused on shape, does seem to straighten the body a little bit or stiffen the body, kind of push it more upright, when I think he might be more at a lean. So maybe we'd have like more of that pelvis tucked behind, but maybe where is that pelvis? Is this the perspective lean? Here's kind of how I'm thinking of that rib. And then where would my legs build? So leg probably comes out here, pretty extreme or in pretty shortened here. And then it does help me. Usually I'll come in with boxes. I just think boxes are a little easier to see and work with in terms of getting those planes. So there. The other thing I might do for this one that I think is, confusing in a lot of poses is there's the kind of the lean forward of the shoulders too. So see how this whole top plane gets light, and then the rib cage itself kind of dips back into shadow. So sometimes separating just to understand and learn the difference. My shoulder girdle from my rib cage mass is beneficial. So we could think of that. And the shoulders have their own gesture and their own importance in terms of communicating. But just from the anatomical perspective, if you think the shoulders here are kind of dropping over and forward the body. So we'd have kind of top of the shoulders, front plane of the shoulders, and then onto the rib cage as it kind of pushes back in space. But we still get that pinch in the front, just like in the other one. They're moving down on the pelvis. This one for the lower leg, we could take these points. You could just kind of work your perspective back from there. It's the plane of the foot. This leg comes up, across. I'm going to go right to the box for this one. Inside, bottom, front. Take these 2 points, gesture them the direction you want the lower leg to go. Let that flow down into the top of the foot. Set up your foot's gesture. And you could keep this a box or a cylinder, whatever you like. Here, kind of have more of like a curvy box. So pretty good. I think you have the right shape. I think the only thing that we could add here might be just a little bit more of the kind of really seeing through all the forms. And then for this arm, you could kind of gesture off that shoulder girdle. Sometimes I use that. And elbow looks like it's about here. There's my cylinder for the upper arm. Forearm ends just in front of the, like say wrist ends just in front of that ankle. So let's get some of that just so it's a little bit easier to understand. I'm setting up. Take some of that away. And then on this side, so this arm goes back, and then kind of have that. Imagine where that point of the elbow is, and then cylinder forward. That'd be the end of the wrist. And then we have the hand kind of draped over that knee. So like I mentioned in the written feedback, I think these are really well done, and the changes that you made to the drawing style, I think, are completely fine. The most important thing is that you kind of get your own approach and comfortable with it, and that you start to adapt how you want to use this information to your own style. I just wanted to give for a more comprehensive feedback, how I might handle some of these challenging poses with that same language of style that we cover in the course. But overall, nicely done.